Follow-up to my insurance company Malicious Compliance. So my friend just told me this subreddit is a thing and I'm having a blast reading about all the hate people have for this awful company. I wrote a story earlier about how a terrible supervisor pushed me to create the most obnoxious action plan for self-improvement ever. Read that here if you're interested. Otherwise, it's Thanksgiving break and I have nothing better to do. So on to part 2. At the end of my previous story I mentioned that I went full Peter Gibbons from Office Space on Geico. I don't think you guys realize just how accurate of a description this is. Some background. Geico is a terrible company to work for. They micromanage you to the extreme. Set impossible expectations. I was graded an F on a call once because I sneezed. Seriously. You only have 4 graded calls a month and this is what determines your ranking as an employee. And expect you to put up with the scum of the earth. I once kept a week-long tally of how many times customers cussed me out every day. I did the math and realized I averaged being cussed out about 15 times a day. Of course, if you work for Geico, this is something you're all aware of. I worked for this hellhole at the height of the recession. I sat at a computer all day answering phones. Then went home and filled out applications until 9:30–10 at night with nothing to show for it for over a year. I'm not the type of guy who gets depressed or lets things get me down. But working at this hellhole ruined my life so severely that I started puking every morning before going into work. I had to call my mom, as a grown-ass adult, on my way to work most mornings and ask her to convince me not to turn around and go home. Something about me. I never call out of work. I'll go into work feeling so sick that I feel like I'm going to die. But I don't call out. Except at Geico. I hated the job so much and was done being treated like dirt. Done with the insane micromanagement. Moronic managers. Computer programs that crashed every other minute and customers who were calling directly from Satan's butthole. I was finishing my master's, teaching credential program at the time and realized that after a year of looking for another job, my student teaching internship was 2 months away. So I just stopped caring. Don't get me wrong. I understand the average customer did nothing wrong to me and I always treated them right. But if somebody cussed me out, I hung up on them. If somebody gave me an attitude, I'd put them on hold for 10 minutes while I went to grab a coffee. I purposely stopped following the corporate script and never upsold anything. Ever. Then I realized that the morning nausea and vomiting I had been experiencing would go away if I simply didn't go into work. I had plenty of sick time saved up and would just call out if I felt like it. If I didn't feel like it, I just wouldn't show up. I ran out of sick time pretty quickly doing this. My logic was simple. And I'll explain that in a bit. One day I had it scheduled to miss the first half of the day to attend a mandatory meeting in regards to setting up my student teaching internship. I told my supervisor I'd be in around 1 or so, depending on how long things took. The day was awesome and I was feeling super enthusiastic about this new chapter in my life. Until I started driving north to go to work. Then that Geico EY feeling of misery hit me. But only for a minute. I called my wife and told her I was hungry. We should get pancakes. So we did. We took our time eating. I had a cup of coffee. Then another. She asked me if I had to go to work. I said, yep, and asked for a third refill. She asked if I was planning on going in. To which I responded, nope. She asked me if I had called to tell anyone and I said, nope. That was that. I took the rest of the day off and loved every minute of it. My supervisor called at least 3 times and I hit the ignore button every time. He left 3 messages about how my behavior was unacceptable too. I deleted all of them. The next day I woke up feeling a bit better, only to have that nauseous feeling hit me the second I realized I had to go to work. So I took my time getting ready, waited 45 minutes or so for traffic to clear and slowly made my way into the office. The boss was waiting for me, and as soon as I clocked in he asked me to meet him in a side office. We sat making small talk for a couple minutes until a higher-up came in. Not his boss, but his boss's boss. That would make him my boss's boss's boss. Serious stuff. The two of them starting tag-teaming me, telling me how my behavior was unacceptable, how I should be ashamed of myself, how I needed to be a team player. I was on thin ice and blah blah blah. I waited patiently until they were done. And no shitting you, the first thing I said was, "You guys done?" Quote. "Okay, good. 'Cause now it's my turn. Here's the thing. I hate this job. This job sucks. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And if the economy wasn't as awful as it was, I would have been out of this hellhole a long time ago. But the economy sucks. Almost as bad as this shit job. And I don't have a choice but to work here." It's been years since this happened, so that's not a verbatim quote, but it's pretty damn close to what was said. I continued, "Here's the thing. You have nothing on me. When I say I don't give a shit, I need you to understand exactly what I mean. I don't give a shit about this job. I have my student teaching internship in 2 months, and I'll not only be done with this shitty job, I'll be done with the bullshit customer service industry forever. But here's the thing. I tried finding another job, but there isn't any other work out there. So I'm stuck here, and you're stuck with me. But here's how I see things. You can fire me now, 2 months before I quit, and that unpaid internship will turn into a fully paid internship thanks to unemployment benefits. I'll have corporate sponsorship of my student teaching. If you don't fire me, I'll tell you what's going to happen. I don't give a shit about this job. I hate it, and I'm not going to follow your BS micromanagement. Use your garbage corporate script or upsell anything. If I don't feel like coming into work, I won't. If I feel like coming in a little late, I will. I'll still do right by the customers because they didn't do anything wrong. You can trust me on that. I won't screw over innocent policyholders. But this company can go suck a big one." I then sat back like Peter Gibbons and said, "Balls in your court. Guys, I gotta tell you, I'll support you either way on this. Honest to God, this is exactly how it went down. Just about everything was paraphrased, but more or less accurate to what happened. With the exception of that final line, I'll support you either way on this." That's a verbatim quote and line I'll always look back on with pride. My boss and my boss's boss's boss just looked at each other and had absolutely no idea what to say. Eventually my boss's boss's boss looked at me and said, "Well, I have to say, usually people aren't that honest. I appreciate you being so direct and honest with me. I guess you can go back to work now." So I did. Of course, being the little shit I am, I shook his hand before I left and said that it was nice meeting him. I spent the next month more or less doing what I wanted to at the company. I still treated customers who deserved it with respect, except for the very last one. But that's another amazing story. But now I didn't use the corporate script, upsell anything that wasn't relevant to the customer, or worry about any of the moronic scores or quotas. I kept to our bargain and stayed home on days that I felt like staying home, and usually rolled in 30 to 45 minutes late to avoid rush hour traffic. Eventually my last day came and I did a final no call, no show, which was perhaps the best one ever. I ignored all 5 of my boss's messages, took the weekend off and started student teaching the next Monday. I'm now on my 8th or 9th year teaching, and there has never been a time when I didn't look back at The end of my tenure at Geico with anything other than pride. Well, I have to say, usually people aren't that honest. I appreciate you being so direct and honest with me. I guess you can go back to work now. That's a straight shooter with upper management written all over him. I knew the budget for animating that lizard came at the cost of its employees. Nice one op. Wow. This series of events is really an indictment of poor management in this company. I would have terminated your employment on the spot, citing a breakdown of trust between employer and employee. That meeting could have gone really bad for them. But I'm glad things worked out the way they did. Doing CS work can be an anxiety-filled experience, and I'm so glad you're out. So, I heard something interesting about the lizard company recently. They don't make a cent on insurance. Their whole bit is just to get a revenue stream that then goes to fund investment, which is where the profit margin is. This seems to follow based on your experience. The job is simply to move customers through the process as rapidly as possible for the most money they can get. And the whole pitch is just, whatever you're paying, you'll pay less with us because we honestly don't care about your policy at all. The call center is their storefront, essentially. So they're gonna micromanage the shit out of it. But nobody on that end of the business is contributing to the profit margin. So you can bet they resent being essentially a marketing write-off. I will never do business with the lizard company. They don't care about anyone. My son was a passenger in a vehicle driven by his teammate. The driver was speeding and racing, lost control of the car and caused a collision. My son and the other passenger died. His lizard insurance company had the balls to offer us just 40% of the maximum payout. I told them, through my lawyer, no, my son is 100% dead. If you don't pay out the maximum for a death, then when do you? That was just one of several events that added insult to injury. TLDR. Geico was stupid. Tried to insist I need a more expensive commercial policy for my personal vehicle simply because I work in construction. Only relevancy my story has to the original post is that it involves Geico. I just hate to miss a chance to badmouth them after the aggravating experience I had with them. Sounds like working for Geico is just as aggravating as it is to be their customer. When I started driving, I got my insurance through them simply because that's who my parents used. A few years later I moved, so I called in to make a payment and report my change of address. For some reason this made them want to ask me a bunch of questions as if I was just opening my policy. One of the things they asked was how many miles do I drive in a year. Being young and stupid, I had absolutely no idea. So I just said, I am a union carpenter and go from job site to job site, so it's hard to say. I was actually working steady at the same job site that was 5 minutes from home, but I needed an excuse to not be able to answer their question. But as soon as they heard that, they decided my truck needs commercial insurance. When I argued, they asked me stuff like how often do you haul tools for work? I told them I have my personal tool belt that I leave on a job site until the job is done. Then they asked how often I haul material for work. Never. How often I haul people for work. Again. Never. Then they asked if I have any signs or decals for my company on my truck and I said no. I then explained that I just drive to the job site, park my truck in the parking lot, and get bussed down into the site. They actually replied with, well, it'd be different if you just drive to an office. Worked for a few hours, and then drove home. My response? That's exactly what I just told you I'm doing. Quote. They still insisted they'd have to switch me over to a commercial policy. which was a lot more expensive. But they'd have an underwriter review my account and they sending out some forms for me to fill out. To contest this. A couple weeks later I got the paperwork in the mail. All they sent me was a single-page form that asked questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely are you to refer us to a friend? Quote. Why did you request this policy change? Quote. Etc. I called them up and asked what the hell the point of these questions were and they apologized. Claimed they sent me the wrong papers but would send out the right ones immediately. So a couple more weeks go by while I'm still on the more expensive policy and I get another envelope from Geico. I got the exact same form as last time except now I got a page too. I ended up throwing forms out and switching to another company that gave me better coverage for half of what I was paying Geico. To this day, probably 15 years later, they still send me letters trying to get me back. But I will never give that company another cent as long as I live. You're not a good employee for coming in sick. You will make other people sick. Stay home. That's some big dick energy right there, and oh so satisfying at the end. Wonderful MC porn. I found it interesting how your body was physically rejecting your job. I was told years ago to trust my gut. It sounds like that's exactly what you did. Quite a few years ago, I contemplated moving to a different apartment. I looked around, didn't see anything that particularly appealed to me, but found one apartment that wasn't too bad. I picked up an application and took it home and filled out the application. I went back to drop it off with my mom. I wanted to show her and get her opinion. As I walked toward the leasing office, having felt perfectly fine all day, the most incredible feeling of nausea hit me. This wasn't psychological. This was physical. Every cell in my body was telling me that this was wrong. I stopped walking, turned to my mom, and said, "Would you think I'm crazy if I turned around right now and went back to the car? This is wrong. I don't know why, but I just know that this is the wrong place for me." She, who had told me to trust my gut years ago, told me that she would not think that I was crazy. And we turned around and went back to the car. Note that even if she had told me she did think I was crazy, it wouldn't have made any difference. I value her opinion, but I don't rule my life by it. I continued living where I was for a bit longer, and then found another place where I lived for another 12 years. I wish I could tell you there was some wrap-up to the story, where there was a horrible crime at that complex. And there may very well have been. But I never knew it. This was just to make the point that when your body tells you something, it's a good idea to pay attention and act on it. One of my kids worked for them briefly. When her supervisor called her a liar after listening to the recording of the call, which actually proved my daughter wasn't lying, my daughter threw her badge on the desk and walked out. The supervisor chased her across the room saying she was pressing assault charges for throwing the badge at her. You deserve a freaking gold crown for sticking it to them. Our anti-work would enjoy this. Also reminds me of Fight Club. IDK if you're in the US. In most states, unemployment benefits do not apply for people who are fired for misconduct or violating company policy. It would be pretty insane if you could go wild and flagrantly just skip work, hang up on customers and disobey other rules just to be able to collect benefits when they rightfully canned you. This story is highly sus, as well as not maliciously complying with anything. Unlike part 1. Epic, simply epic. I'm surprised they didn't promote you to your boss's boss or something. He's a straight shooter with upper management written all over him. I work for one of Geico's rivals in the claims department. I have to deal with multiple other carriers on a daily basis, and they are one of the companies I cringe over every time I have to call them. Their paperwork is always a mess. Their math is always a mess. And when I try to get them to correct their screw-ups to process their subrogation, I always get a nasty attitude where they try to claim no errors without even looking into it. And when I eventually convince them to look into it, it takes them weeks to make their corrections. But fucking forbid I don't handle one of their requests the same damn day they ask for it. Fuck Geico. I wouldn't work there if they doubled my current salary. People in customer service jobs handle a lot of BS. I don't have the stomach or mental health for it. You'd fit in perfectly at our anti-work. Great read. Thanks for sharing. I had a manager that would change his feedback from meeting to meeting. 1 minute I'm golden. The next I'm not meeting expectations. I flat out told him the gaslighting was bullshit. Said he was acting like an abusive boyfriend with the hot and cold interactions. Told him to stop using game theory variable rewards in order to drive engagement. Worked for a game company. I left not long after that. In a 4-month period, half the team quit.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.